This week's top 5 video request is once again from OAW patron Khalil Young. Salute to you, sir. And if you have a request for a top 5 list video, become a patron of OAW Entertainment at patreon.com/OAW. Link is in the description box below. And with that being said, this is my top 5 favorite character portrayals in Smallville. Let's get into it.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
Once again, another huge shout out and salute to OAW patron Khalil Young for another top 5 video request. And when he hit me up with this request, it kind of took me by surprise. The reason for it is because I never really put together this list before. Hear me out with this one. So for those of you all who've been following my channel, you guys know how big of a Smallville fan I am. For those of y'all new to the channel, just to let you guys know, huge Smallville fan. I'm a huge Smallville fan. It's my favorite Superman production. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. Favorite Superman production. It's the series that made me a Superman fan. I was watching it since it first aired, you know, all that jazz. But you know, as much of a fan as I am of the series, you know, I do have my favorite characters, this, is, that, and the other. I never really thought about necessarily favorite character portrayals. And this is what I mean by that. So when I started thinking about the list and I started putting it together, I had to, you know, had to trim the fat, had to really think like who deserved to be on the list. And I thought about character portrayals. What qualifies? What do I mean when I say a character portrayal? Here's the thing. Smallville is notorious for the creative liberties that they take with these DC Comics characters, right? Because Smallville is its own production, it's its own universe, it's its own narrative, its own story. So the manner in which characters are introduced, the way they're integrated into the story, it's not faithful to the source material. Most of it isn't. If you actually think about it, if you go back and you look at the series, all 10 seasons, most of it is not faithful to the source material whatsoever. But you know, but the most, like the big stuff, some of the most important stuff, they, you know, they're faithful to. A lot of it though, they go their own way. They craft their own story. And so because of that, the characters that appear in the series, they're adapted in a way that's supposed to serve the story of the series, not necessarily their comic book source material. So when I thought about that, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Which characters do I like? Which are my favorite characters that are adapted for this series, right? And a couple of things I had to take in consideration. Number one is the manner in which they're written, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, they're the most faithful, you know, compared to other characters, they're the most faithful to their comic book counterpart. Nope. It's all about how they're written within the series. Number two, and probably the most important part, the actor or actress portraying that character, right? Like, and that's probably the biggest part too, because even with a character, whether they're written well or whether they're written poorly, the performance can make or break that character once they appear on screen. So the performances was really, really, really important in the decision making for this list. And so here it is, my top 5 favorite character portrayals. Let's get into it. All right, so kicking off my list at number 5 is Bart Allen / Impulse, portrayed by Kyle Gardner. I love Impulse. I loved Bart in Smallville since he first premieres in season 4, and you know, when he comes back in season 6, and he has a couple of other cameos, but he's not featured in those episodes. But dude, since he first shows up on screen, dude, I love Bart. I love the way he's written. I love, you know, it was, in hindsight, it was actually a really cool choice for them to use who at that time was the youngest Flash from the comics, because, you know, they didn't go Barry, they didn't go Wally. And at the time that the series was airing, we did have Wally West in the Justice League animated series. And this was, of course, years before we would get the inevitable Flash television series from the CW. So the fact that they went with the youngest Flash, the fact that they made him a kid, at the same time, you know, Clark is a teenager, so he's meeting an even younger potential superhero. All in all, dude, I love Bart. I love Bart. I love Bart. I love the way he's written. You know, he's the street kid, sort of he's a runaway. He's a pickpocket. So that's how he pretty much, you know, sustains himself while he's living on the streets, pickpocketing. He meets Clark because he pickpocketed Jonathan. And Clark is fast enough to, you know, track down the thief. And then lo and behold, it's like, oh, snap. I just found someone faster even than me. And of course, so then him and Bart pretty much developed this sort of friendship. And then over time, it kind of develops into sort of this big brother, little brother sort of thing, because Clark is trying to reform him. Eventually, they come up with the idea of Bart being a super. Bart's the one who comes up with the idea of creating like an organization. He was like, maybe we should start like a club or a league or something, which is, you know, a nod to the Justice League, which we do get a form of the Justice League in season 6, and Bart's a member of it. But, you know, that's a couple of seasons later. But anyway, I love Bart. I love Bart. Kyle Gardner's performance, I think the kid is charismatic. Well, kid. He was a grown-ass man by now, but with his performance, I think he's charismatic. He's funny. All of his jokes hit. All of his punchlines hit. He does the snarky humor really well. You know, the quick comeback, the quick witty comeback, which is Flash's like, you know, textbook sort of thing. He does it. He does it all. Great performance. I love him. All of it. All of it. And I even like this last little note about Bart in Smallville. I like how referencing to the episode in season 6, right? Which I think that is what is that? I think that one is just called Justice, is the name of that episode. But when they formed their quote unquote Justice League, like the fact that Bart was pretty much he was sort of the linchpin in the conflict of that episode, because Oliver had recruited Bart to pretty much act as a thief to use in sort of corporate sabotage, because that was Oliver's thing. Like Oliver's Justice League was going around sabotaging the 33.1 labs that Luthor Corp had set up, right, like around the world. And Bart was the thief in that. Like Bart was the one who was supposed to go in, steal information for Oliver's team to use so that they could locate the other labs and this, that, and the other. I thought that was really well done, the way in which Bart was utilized in that. And I like how it was Bart getting captured in that episode that was the thing that finally spurred Clark into joining Oliver's efforts, because one of their own was at risk. So and his performance in that was really good too, because even when he's being interrogated by Lex, like he never gives up Oliver. He doesn't give him anything to work with. Dude, I love Bart. I love Bart. So yeah, that's why he's number 5 on my list. All right. I love Bart. I love Bart. All right. So let's go ahead and let's pull up my number 4. Now, my number 4 is going to surprise a lot of people, I feel like. I feel like it is. But y'all going to bear with me, all right? All right. Yep. Number 4. Kara Zor-El / Supergirl, played by Laura Vandervoort. Like I said, I know this is going to surprise a lot of people because that character had sort of a mixed reception when she premiered in Smallville. A lot of it, in my opinion, roll with me on this one. A lot of it, I think, had to do with when she came on in season 7. That was during the writer's strike, the Writers Guild of America strike. And I say season 11, season 7. I'm sorry, 11. There is no 11th season. Season 7. And the thing is, that was the first season in which you can actually like look and tell, like you could see the quality of the show started to deteriorate a little bit. If it hadn't already, because some people say like season 6, wasn't so good. And even I would argue that case where even by season 6, like that was in terms of quality, it seemed like that was the least season of the previous 6, right? It was the worst season up to that point, but it wasn't bad, right? Like season 6 wasn't bad, but it wasn't as good as seasons 1 through 5. So by the time we got to season 7, the regression started kicking in. You had the writer's strike, so we didn't have the same writers on board. And then keep this in mind too, season 7 was the last season where Michael Rosenbaum was a season regular, where Kristen Kirk was a season regular, and where the showrunners were on the series, because all of those 4 people left after season 7. So part of me thinks that Laura Vandervoort, Supergirl, kind of got a bad rep because of all those things. Here's the thing, though. For her performance as Supergirl, she did a really good job. I thought, and once again, it goes in tandem with the way in which Supergirl was written. Why did she make my list? I love how Kara is written in Smallville. For this one specific thing that they do in this series that we don't see enough in other iterations of the character. Keep this in mind. Kara is Clark's big cousin. She's 16 years older than he is. The fact that we don't write her enough as sort of like this, I don't want to say it's an arrogance. And we know that she is written with sort of this spunk, right? Like she's always, because her stick is she's the spunky teenage sidekick, right? Like that's how Supergirl was originally conceived, right? She's the spunky sidekick, right? But the thing is, it's like, but nah, dude, she's Clark's big cousin. She should treat him as if he's her little cousin. And Smallville does that because the way she talks with Clark, the way she communicates with him, the way she talks to him, it's like, dude, like you're trying to teach me a thing or two. It's like, dude, okay, now yes, this is one of the changes that Smallville made from the source material. In Smallville, and it's one of my qualms with the show because I don't like this change to the source material. In Smallville, they write it as though the Kryptonians had their powers on Krypton. And that's one of the big deviations from the source material that always did kind of bug me about the show, because I don't like that. Because in the comics, Clark only has his powers because he's on Earth, because he's getting the yellow sun radiation. That's what gives him his powers. On Krypton, they shouldn't have any abilities because Krypton had a red sun, and under the red sun, they don't have any powers. That is even a thing in Smallville, right? Like, okay, but y'all roll with me on this one. It's one of the things that Smallville doesn't keep straight with their mythology. But y'all roll with me on this one. So in the series, the Kryptonians had their abilities on Krypton. Well, Kara knows that, right? Because she was a teenager on Krypton. So when she arrives on Earth and Clark is pretty much trying to train her on how to use her abilities, she's like, dude, who are you to train me? You don't even know how to fly. And that was the big thing about Supergirl on Smallville was, oh snap, she can fly, right? So that notion of Kara having that sort of like air about her as being the older cousin, like I totally dug that about her personality, and it totally makes sense, right? Also, it does create it creates a nice character arc for her, because while she had, according to the Smallville mythology, while she had her powers on Krypton, she doesn't know how to use them on Earth. They're different, right? The impact, she's stronger on Earth. And so Clark is pretty much trying to teach her how to control her powers, how to rein them in. So we go from the big cousin, little cousin dynamic to a mentor-student dynamic, and Kara has to humble herself and become a student. That creates a good character arc for her. The final thing I'm going to mention about Kara in Smallville, and it's one of the most tragic things about the character, and it's one of the things that is unique to her that isn't shared by Clark, and it's this. Kara is old enough to remember her life on Krypton. So unlike, like, we know how tragic Superman's backstory is because he lost his home world, he lost his family, he lost his people, and for over half of his life, if you think about it, for over half of his life, he knew nothing of his Kryptonian heritage, culture, anything like that. Kara is more tragic because she has memory of all of that. See, Clark was an infant. Kara wasn't. Kara remembers her parents. She remembers her aunt and uncle. She had friends. She had neighbors. She had teachers. Kara remembers Krypton. So the fact that she wakes up from suspended animation, in the comics, she awakes roughly 32 years later because Clark is around like 31, 32. In Smallville, it's 21 years later. But she wakes up from suspended animation and her world is gone. And everybody is gone. Now, in the comics, there is it's not the same thing because in the comics you still have Argo City where Kara does come from, and that's where the refugees of Krypton went. So she was still around people from Krypton in the comics. So that tragedy, it doesn't have the same impact in the comics, in that iteration of the comics. But it does if you've read it's the World's Finest Story with the arrival of is it the Girl from Krypton? The Girl from Krypton story in the World's Finest book, in the Batman Superman team up comic, which was the source material for Batman Superman Apocalypse, the animated film. That story, they're doing what Smallville did, or vice versa. Smallville is doing what that story did, where Kara she's a lone survivor. Like Argo City isn't a thing. Her parents are gone. All of that. So anyway, I said all of that to say this, like Smallville does a good job at relating that tragic story. And we feel it with Kara, and it's a thing with her. And I think Laura Vandervoort does a great job at bringing that through. Also, the sort of naivete that character has, being so young. I think that is done really well. I think she does a really good job at that. So all in all, she does a good job with this character. No, the character isn't always written the best, but that ain't her fault. Her performance is still really good. So that's why she made it on my list. Yeah, that's why she made it on my list. All right. So let me go ahead and pull up. Boy, I love using these graphics, don't you guys? Thank you, StreamYard. All right, so let me go ahead and pull up my number 3, which this one I think is going to be less of a surprise for people. I think people can figure out this number 3. All right, so yeah, number 3 is my man, John Glover as Lionel Luthor. Yeah, he's my number 3. Okay, so here's the thing about that. Remember how I said the portrayals are based upon 2 things, not only the performance of the actor portraying them, but also the manner in which that character is adapted for the series. Smallville Lionel is one of the best adapted characters in the show. The reason for that is because, for any of you all who are familiar with the Superman comics, Lionel isn't really that big of a character in the comics, at least because he is integrated in the comics like more recently, like within the last 20 years. But I'm talking about prior to Smallville, which Smallville is almost 20 years old now. Can you believe it? Next year, Smallville will be 20 years old. But prior to Smallville, dude, Lionel only existed in the comics as a part of Lex's backstory. That was pretty much it. Lionel wasn't really a player in the Superman comics. So most of this character, as he is portrayed in this series, is original material. I'll give you the best example of this. Lionel's backstory in Smallville, where he kills his parents in the apartment building, and he uses the insurance money from the building to start Luthor Corp. That's Lex's backstory in the comics. But for Smallville, they took that and they incorporated that in for Lionel's backstory. But yeah, pretty much all of the work that's done in the series with the relationship between Lionel and Lex, how they create that nice parallel between Lionel and Jonathan Kent, all of that stuff is original. From like the series and its writers made that material up. But all in all, Lionel is a great character. He serves as a great mentor, but he also serves as a great foil for Lex. He's really good. He's really good at that. He serves as a great foil for Jonathan. He serves as a good alluring, but also antagonistic character at times for Martha. And then he is a really weird character for Clark, because earlier in the series, he is someone that Clark only really knows through Lex. And so Clark sort of developed his perception of Lionel based off of what Lex has shared with him, and then also based off of what his parents has shared with him. But all of that changes in season 5, season 6, and especially in season 7, when Lionel becomes an ally of Clark, and when he becomes a vessel for Jor-El. Like when that happens, it totally, that dynamic shifts, right? And then of course, dude, spoiler for those of you all who have not seen the series, but when Lionel finally dies in season 7, dude, the scene in the graveyard between Clark and Lex, that definitive line in the sand that is finally drawn with those characters, where it's like, yes, they are arch nemesises, they are enemies from this point forward. Dude, that's probably the best, I would argue, that's probably the best episode of season 7. And probably the best scene of season 7. One of the best scenes of season 7. Season 7 didn't have a lot of good stuff in it, but that was one of the highlights. Right up there with some of the Supergirl stuff. That was one of the highlights of season 7, man. Woo, man, that was yeah, that was good. That was good. So yeah, so that's why Lionel makes it on my list. He is one of my favorite characters in the series, because once again, as I mentioned earlier, favorite portrayals doesn't necessarily mean favorite characters, but Lionel is one of my favorite characters. Definitely. Most definitely. All right. So let me close up my man Lionel's window real quick. All right, so my final 2, I feel like people are going to figure out my final 2. I think they will. And if you have, good, more power to you. I think people will figure out my final 2. All right, so yes, coming in at number 2, Jonathan Kent, portrayed by John Schneider. So this is one of those where it's like, yes, this is one of my favorite characters. But let me put it to you like this, guys. Not only is John Schneider's Jonathan Kent one of my favorite characters on Smallville, he's my favorite portrayal of Jonathan Kent in Superman media, period. Like, of all the Jonathan Kents, he's my favorite. He's also one of my favorite TV dads. Like, father figures on television, one of my favorites. He's probably my second favorite, right behind Alan Matthews from Boy Meets World. I love Jonathan. I love Jonathan in this series. I love John Schneider's portrayal of that character. Jonathan was the character that he was one of the characters that made me realize who Superman was as a character, because this is the man that Clark gets his foundation from. And all of that is beautifully illustrated in this show. I love how they don't make what Smallville did really well, and I think it's one of the things that made the series so popular, is because the main thing about Smallville was that it took the Superman mythology and it made it relatable for a lot of general audiences, right? Because everybody thinks of Superman as like this perfect figure that can do no wrong. Smallville humanizes Clark, and it does the same thing with his parents. Jonathan and Martha in Smallville, they're not that picture perfect Norman Rockwell, sort of portrayal like they were even in the Christopher Reeve Superman films, right? They're not. They are they're three-dimensional characters. They are complicated people. Jonathan is not perfect. Jonathan used to have a drinking problem. Jonathan has anger issues. Jonathan lies to be able to adopt Clark. Jonathan works with Lionel in order to be able to legitimize a illegal adoption of Clark by giving up his neighbor farmers. Jonathan does a lot of morally questionable and ethically questionable things, but he does it for his family. He does it for his wife. He does it for his son. And that does, I know. It's crazy, dude. But the work they do with that character in that series is so good. And it's like, yeah, Jonathan did some pretty, questionable things. I don't think that takes away from who he is as a man, though. I don't think that takes away from the overall morality and the moral compass that he has. Sometimes there is a sort of ends justifies the means sort of thing, but Jonathan is constantly fighting that. He's constantly fighting that because he himself never wants to be one of those people, and he acknowledges those things. He acknowledges those things. He's remorseful for those things. He makes the effort to be better. He makes the effort to learn from his mistakes, to never make those mistakes again. And all of that, all of those teachings, he passes on to Clark. And that's where Clark's moral and ethical foundation comes from. Jonathan is so freaking important to who Superman becomes, who he is and who he becomes. And this portrayal of Jonathan, dude, it does it so well. And John Schneider's performance is so good. I can't say enough. I can't say enough about it. And for those of you all who have yet to check out the series, I highly recommend you guys check it out just for that alone, dude. He's so good. He's so good. Yeah, he's really good. He's really, really good. Okay, so I don't have any honorable mentions for this segment. There are some other portrayals that I like in the series. Whether, just some of my favorite characters, Clark, Lois, Oliver, Cyborg, Aquaman, kind of, just because I like the way in which they wrote his backstory for the series. Like, he was a swimmer for Miami U, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool because it makes sense for the orange and green. Like, now that kind of that there's some little stuff like that. But yeah, but none enough, none enough, I thought, to make an honorable mention. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. All right. So with that being said, it's time to reveal my number one. Everyone's gonna get it if they haven't gotten it by now. I think most people will get it. I don't know. I think most people will get my number one. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they will. I think they will, but maybe not. Maybe not. I think they will though. Come on, man. You already know what time it is. You already know what time it is. Yeah. My number one favorite character portrayal in Smallville, Michael Rosenbaum, Lex Luthor. Come on, dude. Just like Jonathan Kent, this is my favorite portrayal of the character, period. One of my favorite television villains. What Michael Rosenbaum does in this role, and like I say, it's two-part, right? It's two-part. Because on the one hand, Lex is written very well, especially in the earlier seasons, specifically seasons 2 and seasons 3. Those 2 seasons especially. Lex is written extremely well. I think part of that has to do with because in those earlier seasons is when we see Lex try to make the attempt from being an antagonistic character to being more of a protagonist. He sort of teeters on the line of an anti-hero at times in season 3. Just because of everything that happens with him, on the island and his psychological break, having his memory wiped, trying to uncover what happened, with the murder of his grandparents and all that type of jazz, him butting heads with Lionel. Because here's the thing, by the time we get to season 2, because season 2 is when Lionel, Lionel is a season regular by season 2. I believe he is. But you could make the argument by season 3, Lionel is the main villain of season 3. He's the main antagonist in season 3. So you have Lex, butting up against him. So a lot of really good material is done with Lex in those earlier seasons. But I also love how little by little, season 4, season 5, especially by season 6, dude. What we do with Lex becoming the villain is really, really good. I really, really dug it. Also, I enjoy how Lex has one of those things where it's like the things that make, going back to referencing back to my Megamind review, right? When I was talking about Titan, right? And how the things that made him into a villain, he already had those traits to begin with. Lex is the same way. Like Lex already had all the things that would turn him into what he would inevitably become. And I like how when you look at his story, dude, it's very Shakespearean. It's very much a Shakespearean tragedy in that sense where Lex is fighting tooth and nail not to become his father, but in doing so, in the things he do, the steps he takes, he ends up becoming that. He actually ends up becoming even worse than that. Because at least Lionel has some type of redeemable qualities. Lex ends up losing his over time. He ends up becoming a very reprehensible person. Some real skullduggery stuff, especially by the time we get to season 6. Some really messed up stuff. But all in all, dude, Michael Rosenbaum, dude, it's insane, dude. It's insane listening to Michael Rosenbaum talk about, when he was, doing Smallville and whatnot, because his take on his time on the show is real kind of mixed, right? Like, it's not that he necessarily hated it. He just has a very, I would say he has a very unexpected insight into his time on the show, because you wouldn't necessarily think that, because his performance is such. And then of course, you know, the reasons why he left the show, and the fact that he only ever came back for the series finale, for the final episode of season 10. And you know, just hearing his commentary on the show, it is sort of surprising, right? Because you get the sense that he had this sort of like mixed relationship, you know, while he was on that show. And yeah, you can tell that there was some burnout there. You know, after a while, you know, when you've been doing a character for so long, you know, eventually, you know, the time comes for you to move on to something else. We all get that, right? But that never comes through in his performance. That's my point for bringing that whole thing up. You can't tell. You can't tell. I don't think he ever phones it in. I don't. He brings his A game every time, dude, and it's great. It's great. Like I said, I'm spoiled at this point because of I blame Michael Rosenbaum. I blame him. He spoiled me. Every portrayal of Lex that I have experienced since Smallville, I always want to see this Lex again, and I feel like I never get that. I don't get the cold, calculating, methodical, stoic Lex at the same time. That with the charismatic, fun, likable Lex. Like I have yet to see a performance from anyone that does both of those the way Michael Rosenbaum does them. I have yet to see that. I want to see it again. I blame you, Mr. Rosenbaum, because you were too good. The bar was set too high, sir. So yeah, but that's why he is my number one favorite character portrayal from Smallville. Straight up. All right. So that is pretty much going to conclude this top 5 list. Once again, like I said, top 5 coming in at number 5 is my man Bart Allen, aka Impulse, portrayed by Kyle Gallner. Number 4 is Kara Zor-El, aka Supergirl, portrayed by Laura Vandervoort. Number 3 is Lionel Luthor, portrayed by John Glover. Number 2, Jonathan Kent, portrayed by John Schneider. And last but finally not least, my number 1 all-time favorite, Lex Luthor, portrayed by Michael Rosenbaum. Yeah, so I am interested in hearing from you all. What are, for all of my Smallville fans in the house, what are some of your favorite portrayals? Even if it's not a favorite portrayal, just tell me some of your favorite characters. Like I said, I mentioned some of my other ones earlier. You know, Clark is a favorite of mine, probably my all-time favorite from the show, honestly. But one of the reasons he didn't make it onto my list is because Tom Welling, as great as he is as Clark in the show, that's not even my favorite Superman portrayal. Believe it or not, my favorite Superman portrayal, like my favorite version of that character, is actually the one from Justice League Unlimited, specifically the last 3 seasons of Justice League, the animated series, seasons 3, 4, and 5, Unlimited. That's my favorite Superman. That's my favorite Superman. So that's one of the reasons he didn't make it on the list. I love Erica Durance as Lois, but yeah, she didn't make it on my list either. Like I said, some other ones. I like Oliver in this. I like Pete. Pete Ross. I like Pete. I like Aquaman, Cyborg. The Smallville's version of Black Canary. I dug. So yeah, Zod is kind of hit or miss for me. Brainiac is another one that I really liked, but that's not even my favorite portrayal of that character either. So those are some other characters. They didn't make it on the list. But anyway, I want to hear you guys. Let me know what some of your favorite portrayals are, some of your favorite characters from the series. All in all, go ahead, leave them in the comments below. As always, like this video. If you like it, share it with people that you think would get a kick out of it. And if you have yet to do so, become a subscriber of OAW Entertainment right here at youtube.com/OAW Entertainment. And once again, another huge shout out to OAW patron Khalil Young for this request. Thank you so much once again, sir, for supporting the channel, for helping to create the content, for the channel. And last but certainly not least, if you guys want to see a list of your own, right? You guys, hey Larry, man, I want to know what's your top 5 for this or your top 5 for that. Top 5 for this. Hey, if you guys got an idea for a list, become a patron, man. Patreon.com/OAW. Currently, the top 5 tier is only $15. It's only $15. And guess what else? For the $15, not only do you guys get a top 5 video of your choosing, you also get access to the OAW Vault, which is the original Otaku Assemble weekly web series, those old anime, manga, movie reviews, and rants. All of those, you get access to that entire library. Plus, you will also get invites to guest star on my monthly live streams. So yeah, $15, man. Patreon.com/OAW. Join in with the patrons, man. Become one of the fold. And with that being said, this has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief. I am signing off, and I will catch you cats later. Peace.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?